Hey guys, it's Jello. Welcome back to the channel. I know that it's been well over a year now since I posted only one video on this channel. I'm sorry. I have definitely been focusing on my main channel, which you can check out somewhere here. Demonautica. It's where I do paranormal investigations. I've been focusing on that channel and starting a new job and stuff like that, and completely forgot that this channel existed. I definitely still want to post stuff on here, so I am back, and I'm going to be posting every single Wednesday from here on out. In this video, I'm going to be talking about my horror story with Nutcracker syndrome. Before I get into my story and my experience, I just want to say I am not a medical professional, and I don't want to tell my story to scare any of you. If you have Nutcracker syndrome and you've been seeing a lot of horror stories on the internet and it's stopping you from getting necessary treatment that you and your doctor know you need to have, please just take these stories with a grain of salt. I don't want to influence anyone in the wrong direction. Anyways, with all of that said, let's get right into the video. So what is Nutcracker syndrome? Basically, Nutcracker syndrome is when one of your kidney veins, your renal veins, for me it was my left, is compressed between your aorta and an artery, like a nutcracker, and compresses it and crushes it in a sense, and blood flow isn't able to go through properly. And a lot of times blood flow ends up going backwards and flowing through the heart backwards like it did for me. Since the blood doesn't really have anywhere to go in the right direction and it flows backwards and the pressure's all messed up, it starts to create new pathways, which can lead to something called pelvic congestion syndrome. For me, these new pathways created in my pelvis, and I had pelvic congestion syndrome and a lot of reflux in the veins. Nutcracker syndrome causes severe flank pain, which is just one of many symptoms, but that's the biggest one that I noticed was severe flank pain and severe pelvic pain from the pelvic congestion syndrome. As for my story, this all starts when I was about 7 or 8 years old. I started having this really bad back pain. I got food allergy tested, figured out I was lactose intolerant and cut out dairy, but nothing was helping. I ended up going to a children's hospital and getting an MRI of my back, which they found nothing again. I had just such severe back and flank pain, and anytime I would go in to a doctor, to an emergency room, because the pain would get so bad, nobody would listen to me. They would say it's in my head or I was making stuff up and didn't believe me that I was in so much pain. Finally, in 2021, on one of my many ER visits, I had gone in, once again, severe pain. And when they did a CT scan on me, which I've had many in the past, one of the doctors finally noticed that my left renal vein was compressed and I might have Nutcracker syndrome. I then took this information to my primary care provider, and she gave me a referral to my first vascular clinic. The first one I went to, the man was pretty rude to me. He told me I needed to just gain weight and that would fix everything. He was very, very rude to me and said I was too young to be having these issues. So I got transferred to a different vascular clinic. At this clinic, they immediately scheduled me to do my first of many venogram procedures. A venogram is basically when they take a sheath, a hollow needle of sorts, and place it either through your groin or your jugular main artery or vein, something like that. I know what I'm talking about. And they insert this really long catheter so that they can pump in radioactive material and get a better look at the structure of your veins and what's going on vascularly. I don't think that's a word, but we'll pretend it is. For a lot of people, venograms are a little bit easier because they go to sleep. You're not given anesthesia of any sorts. It was fentanyl and Versed, so a pain reliever and an anti-anxiety. I had already had like 9 surgeries prior to this, so these medications just aren't effective for me anymore because of my tolerance. So I was awake the whole time, talking to the surgeons. We were talking about music. They were putting on some music suggestions I was giving them. We were talking about their kids, their lives, whatever. I was fully aware and awake. This first one wasn't too bad. It was a little painful, but not too bad. At the end of the procedure, I ended up getting an official diagnosis of Nutcracker syndrome and of pelvic congestion syndrome. They then told me that I was going to need to have an open abdominal surgery or a midline incision, which for me, I'm not going to show you, but it goes from here to here. They were going to open me up, basically place my intestines and stuff on the table to chill for a minute, and just try to move my vein. A renal transposition surgery. September 30th, 2021, I went in for my first surgery. Yes, first. It was the most pain that I've ever experienced in my entire life. I don't remember anything at all the days following surgery aside from the pain. I do vaguely remember having a catheter in for, I think, 4 days because I wasn't able to move at all from the incision. I do remember getting that pulled, which was not fun. The only other thing I remember is being taken off to an x-ray to make sure everything was looking good. And it was an x-ray where you had to stand up between the 2 plates. And I hadn't really been standing for that long at this point. Like I couldn't stand for very long without getting so dizzy and lightheaded and in pain. So as I was standing for this x-ray, I ended up fainting. Other than those 2 things, literally all I remember is pain. I was on a pain button, so I got a small dose of Dilaudid, I think every 5 minutes, that I was able to just press the button and get immediately. And on the 5th day at being in the hospital, they told me I was doing well enough to start moving home to recover. Recovery at home was weird because I didn't have any help. I also didn't have a bed frame at the time, I just had a mattress that was on the ground, and trying to get up and down off the floor with a midline incision was extremely difficult and painful. I ended up wrapping a rope around either side of my closet and had to do like this pulley system just to get in and out of bed. I was in so much pain and miserable. My incision had this gnarly swollen bruise. I knew there was going to be a lot of swelling and bruising, but this just didn't seem right. It was very bruised and looked very gross. At home, I started not being able to keep anything down, foods or liquids. I was throwing everything up that would go into my body. I was at home for 3 days before going back into the emergency room. I just had an episode of pain that was so bad I was panicking and screaming out and blacking out and had to be rushed to a hospital. I did make a mistake though, and because I was in a panic to just get somewhere immediately, I did not go to the hospital where the surgery was performed. I went to the hospital that was closest to me. At this hospital, my hemoglobin was so dangerously low, and they performed a CT scan on me to find that I had internal bleeding. I ended up being admitted to their vascular unit and getting some blood transfusions. The blood transfusions saved my life, but I do have to say it's a really weird feeling seeing and feeling somebody else's cold blood go into your body. Very thankful for it once again, it was just strange. At this hospital, they started putting me on NPO, which means I could not have anything by mouth, not water, not food. I couldn't keep it down anyways. The only thing that I was allowed was a wet mouth swab just to keep my mouth moist a couple times a day. But even without anything in my system for multiple days now, I was throwing up an insane amount of bile. Unrelated to the actual medical portion of this, but still relevant, during this hospital experience, my ex, my boyfriend at the time, he would visit me and take smoke breaks. He would visit me every couple days or so and he would take smoke breaks. And I found out a couple days into being at the hospital that on his smoke breaks, he was actually going out to the car to watch adult content. And on the days he wasn't visiting me, it's because he was at home watching adult content instead of being with his girlfriend who was dying from blood loss. So I obviously cut things off with him and went through a breakup while I'm dying in the hospital from blood loss. This whole, like, 2 years of everything panning out, it was just like the worst, darkest time of my life. Anyways, at about the 5-day mark in this hospital, they ended up sending me home, which is something I'm pretty angry about to this day. They did nothing to assess the internal bleeding. They gave me a blood transfusion. They didn't check up on it again. They did nothing. I was literally signing the discharge papers while throwing a bile into a bag. But they sent me home. I was dying and they sent me home. I was at home for 2 days, getting worse and worse and worse. Finally, I called the surgeon who did my surgery, and he got me a room ready at the hospital and had me immediately admitted. When we got there, they had me step on a scale since I hadn't been eating for weeks now at this point, and I was 100 pounds. I started before surgery at about 125 pounds. So I lost 25 pounds in a matter of a couple weeks. I was also so severely dehydrated that they couldn't find any of my veins and had to use an ultrasound so that they could place an IV in. They mostly just monitored me for a couple weeks, keeping me on IV fluids, not having anything by mouth, and pain meds. I was vomiting an insane amount of bile that would fill up a bucket about this big, like every few hours. They ended up placing an NG tube in, a nasogastro tube or something like that. Yeah, a nasogastro tube. A tube that goes through my nose and down into my stomach, and they used this tube to suck out the bile and try to decompress my stomach. And in this state, they did not do a CT scan, they did not monitor my internal bleeding, they did nothing, but they sent me home again. I was at home this time for 1 day before being rushed back to the hospital. I was admitted again, and this time I was 90 pounds. They finally did a CT scan to see the internal bleeding to find that I had a hematoma in my retroperitoneal that was this big, and it was an intestinal blockage at this point. And they sent me home multiple times to different hospitals with that. Sorry, I'm angry about this. Not only did they find this massive hematoma that was blocking off my intestines, but they also found that the previous open surgery was not successful. I still was not getting appropriate blood flow to my kidneys. So I got scheduled for my second open surgery. They were going to open up my midline incision again, drain and remove the hematoma, and then perform a renal vein graft surgery. Since surgery was scheduled in the meantime, I had now not fully eaten anything for almost a month. So they put me on IV nutrition. I had a PICC line placed. It was put somewhere here on my bicep. They did an ultrasound to filter it through. It went right above my heart, I believe, like right in here. And I was given 2 different kinds of IV nutrition each day. Well, it'd switch out each time, but they were like pretty huge bags. I ended up calling them my vein milk because one of them looked like milk. I had to do anything to find humor. I also, because I had, at one point I had a heparin, I had an IV on the side, an IV on the side, my PICC line, and I had like blood thinners going through one, my pain medication going through one, my IV nutrition and blood draws going through this one. I was just connected to 2 different things at any given point in time, and I took that IV pole with me everywhere, so much that I named it Pablo the pole. And every time I would go back to the hospital, I would get a new Pablo. I had Pablo II, Pablo III, so on and so forth, but it's just a whole inside joke now about Pablo. Anyways, on October 28th, I had my second open surgery, my renal vein graft surgery. Surgery went pretty well, but I was in even more excruciating pain since they did have to open back up the same incision they had just gone into. But I was finally able to eat again. slowly, but I was able to get some food in. They kept me monitoring my food intake and giving me lots of protein and making sure I was gaining at least a pound or 2, and giving me blood thinners, and then they sent me home. Recovery was long and horrible and painful at home, especially without any help. But it was going a lot better than the first time around. In December, still recovering from surgery, I got COVID. I remember coughing so hard that I was sure that my whole abdomen was just gonna burst open. Thankfully, that did not happen. Pillows and Squishmallows were my lifesaver to hold and like put pressure while I was coughing and dying. But February 11th, I went to have a venogram. We knew I still had some issues with the pelvic congestion syndrome, and they wanted to embolize or shut off some of my pelvic veins and place coils in them as well. While they were in there, they realized that my second open surgery failed again. It failed so terribly that they couldn't even get to my pelvic veins because it was so blocked off. They couldn't even embolize the veins and basically went in for nothing. This time they had gone in through my groin and I felt everything. It was extremely painful. They tried to push through a lot of spots in my vein to try to get through and just couldn't get through. They had gone in through actually both my jugular and my groin vein, and it was very painful. Since I found that both of my open surgeries have failed, I got scheduled for a third open surgery. Before jumping into the surgery on March 17th, we decided to try another venogram to see if a stent could be placed in the renal vein to kind of prop it open. None of the medications were working and I was crying and screaming the whole time of this procedure. It was very painful, but they were not able to place the stent. On April 1st, 2022, I went in for my third open surgery, once again through the midline incision, and this time a renal vein bypass surgery. Surgery was successful. I was in the hospital for 5 days and sent home. But a few days later, I started having extreme excruciating pain and a really high fever. I went back to the hospital where we discovered I now had a very large blood clot in my bypass that was stopping blood flow. They put me on IV blood thinners again to try to break up the blood clot, and after a week in the hospital, they sent me home I tried Xarelto, I tried something with an S, I can't remember all the names, and then I went on warfarin, and none of it was working, so I ended up being on both Xarelto and heparin shots. I was giving myself 2 shots in my hip or butt cheek twice a day. I went in for another venogram to see if the blood clot had broken up any by using the blood thinners, and it did not. They tried fitting a stent again, but it wasn't the right size. This was so freaking painful. I had way too high of a tolerance at this point to any of the pain medications, and I started bleeding profusely. I remember being wheeled back into the recovery room, and once I'm like coming back to from the agony, not from being sleepy, but just from being in so much pain, I was blacked out. Once I came to from that, I was literally sitting in a pool of my own blood. Just a week later, I had a proper fitting stent place, and that was successful. A few days after that, I went to the ER with 2 ovarian cysts that were over an inch long. Inch in diameter, sorry. Not related to Nutcracker syndrome, but it was just back-to-back everything. And having the cysts right after having my pelvic veins embolized, because they did end up doing that in that third surgery, I forgot to mention that, was really extremely painful. But I started to get better. I was on blood thinners for a long time, and I went in every month for an ultrasound, a venous ultrasound, to make sure that everything was in place and looking good and the blood clot wasn't getting any bigger, because the blood clot was still there. But everything was looking good, finally. Now, 2 years later after my third surgery, I have ultrasounds twice a year to check on the blood clot, my stent, the bypass, and make sure everything's still looking good. I still have that small clot. It's against my stent and my bypass, but otherwise everything's looking really good finally. I am seriously so thankful that I made it out of this huge hurdle in my life. I did not think that I was going to come out of this. I truly thought that I was going to pass away. I do have some severe scar tissue along my midline incision from being opened up 3 times. And because I have endometriosis, I actually found through an exploratory surgery last year that I now have endometriosis growing up my entire midline incision, which is really painful, but nothing compared to the pain that I was dealing with before. I also just cannot express enough how thankful I am for the doctors, surgeons, and nurses that helped me in the hospital. Specifically, my favorite nurse, don't tell the others, Nancy. She was amazing. She would come in and just sit with me and talk. We had these jokes about me being a vampire, which probably isn't a joke. She was just incredible. She went so above and beyond to make sure I had everything I need and I was okay emotionally. A night nurse that I had a lot, Kayla, as well, she made this black origami flower that had a glow stick for a stem and just like came in to my room one night when I had a lot of pain and gave me this cute little flower she made me. There was just so many beautiful nurses and people, and I even had a couple therapy dogs visit me when I was in the hospital, which seriously made everything so much better because for I think I was in the hospital a total of 2.5 or 3 months with everything together. I think it was 3 months altogether. I missed my dogs and my cat so freaking much, so having the therapy dogs was pretty awesome. This was truly the darkest and scariest time of my life, but I made it. I made it through. I cheated death, and I'm here today to tell the tale. If you made it this far, thank you so much for listening to my story with Nutcracker syndrome. If you have any questions or if there's any videos you want to see based around chronic illness, please let me know in the comments below. And if you're a weirdo like me and you want to watch paranormal investigations, please go check out my main channel. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. I'm going to start posting these every single Wednesday, just different things about my chronic illness. And yeah, thank you guys for sticking around, and I will see you next Wednesday. Bye!